Welcome to Ecclesia Principles, a biblical strategy for restoring America, with your host, Ray Eppard.
I hope you're having a great new year so far. And what we're looking at right now is primarily some of the biblical basis for some statements in the Declaration of Independence. Specifically, when they said that they believed that these truths were self-evident, that all men are created equal and are given unalienable rights, and among these being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Just a little side thought. Years ago, when I heard that statement, wasn't the first time, but we hold these truths to be self-evident. I got thinking about that one day, and I thought, well, those truths aren't self-evident to me. And I'd present to you that those truths are not self-evident today to most people. That's not self-evident. So evidently, the founding fathers, they were looking at some things that we're not looking at. But if we'll look at some of the same things, then we'll see that these truths are self-evident. And particularly, they're talking about the Creator, so they're talking about from the biblical perspective. You see, America is not a Christian nation because of the number of people that are Christian within the nation. That's not what that term refers to. A nation is a Islamic nation, a Hindu nation, a Christian nation, based on what is the primary influence in the laws and the government structure. You see, America has never been, if you would, mostly Christian, I don't think. But our structure of government and our laws have been influenced by the Bible. That's what makes it a Christian nation. Now, with this, one of the things that they saw that the Bible teaches us is that the Creator made us in His likeness. Image has to do with what we look like. Likeness has to do with our function, how we operate, what place we have, if you would. We're to be like Him. And so as they took being in the likeness of God and began to put that into the concepts of government, that's what began to make some of these things self-evident. Now, again, they said among these were life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. We spent more time last time talking about on our last podcast, and if you didn't hear it, I would encourage you to go back and get that, where we talked about how they're unalienable. They're unalienable because God, who cannot lie, made these statements, and this is how He set it up. That's why they're unalienable. They're unaltering. Now, they listed three: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life is largely derived from the statement in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not murder, or do not commit murder. At that point, if God says you're not to be murdered, that means you have a right to life. No one is to snuff out your life. You have a right to life. The only exception of that is for heinous crimes. Genesis 9 talks about that part, and it mainly has to do with capital murder type situations. Now, then you get into the pursuit of happiness. That's the last one that's listed there, and I want to look at that one today. The pursuit of happiness. Now, if you look at most of the information from that time period when they would discuss these things, they usually did not talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They talked about life, liberty, and personal property. When they got to the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson changed that terminology. from life, liberty, pursuit, and life, liberty, and personal property to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the primary reason he did that is he did not want the Declaration of Independence to be something that would instill slavery as an institution in our country. Because again, if you get down to it, out of the 13 colonies, 11 were good with removing slavery from the new country. 2 were not. Hence, part of Franklin's statement, we either hang together or we all hang separately. But Jefferson changed it from personal property, because a lot of people viewed the slaves as their personal property. So he changed that to the pursuit of happiness. And with that, that also comes from the concept of the 10 Commandments. That, number 1, thou shalt not steal. Not commandment number 1, but first point 1. Thou shalt not steal. I have a right to my stuff. No one else has a right to my stuff. My neighbor doesn't. Person down the road doesn't. Somebody wandering by doesn't. The federal government doesn't. I have a right to my stuff. I have a right to my personal property. And part of the reason he changed that to the pursuit of happiness is a lot of the stuff that you get it because it contributes to something you want to do, something that makes you happy. That there's a biblical foundation for that pursuit of happiness and you having your personal property protected. Now, I want to dig into this a little bit more when we come back after this brief break.
Jesus said, I will build my church, or ecclesia. Ecclesia identified those who were called out to vote on issues that determined their culture. Jesus expects us to positively influence our culture with equality, liberty, and justice for all.
All right, we're back. And again, we're talking about the unalienable rights. Particularly today, we're talking about the pursuit of happiness. And again, the biblical basis for this is really found in the 10 Commandments. When God said, thou shalt not steal, or do not steal, and do not covet. Those things both identify that property belongs to people and other people don't have a right to that property, that it belongs to you. See, again, if you go back in your mind to Genesis 1:26, and it says, and God said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the earth. In the book of Psalms, it says that the heavens are the Lord's, but the earth he has given to the children of men. You see, God at the very beginning, when he made man, he gave dominion over the earth to humanity. If you would, he gave the stuff on earth to people, to Adam and Eve. And therefore, all of us as their descendants, we own part of it. I mean, ultimately, it's still God's, but we have that. And it's not to be taken from us. Now, you see, with this, as I stated before, thou shalt not steal. That includes the neighbor. That includes the person down the street. That includes somebody wandering by. That includes the federal government. You see, ultimately, in every situation, there is somebody that's at the top of the chain in deciding things and figuring things out. Biblically speaking, God put the human being, the individual, and you see, the individual and then the family, he put those at the top. When he said, thou shalt not steal, that deals with everybody else. You're not supposed to take it. You're not supposed to take it without consent. When the founders set up our government and said it was by the consent of the people, that was acknowledging that, if you would, the way God had set things up is that the individual was at the top of the chain. and that then government was actually below the individual. Now that's a radical statement today. But if you would, that was a truth that the founding fathers held as being self-evident. It wasn't the way King George had dealt with it, but that's how they saw life. That's how they saw it. And they really got it, again, from the scriptures. That pursuit of happiness. My property. There's things that I buy. I buy the furniture that I buy because I like that furniture. Nobody should come in and take it. We have some on our deck. We have some patio furniture. We bought that because my wife liked it. Most of us guys understand you don't buy it unless she likes it. Not always that I like it. But anyway, but nobody else has a right to it because we bought that to make ourselves happy. Now, that's not the source of our happiness, but we bought it because we like it. And no one else has a right to it. Thou shalt not steal. It's all based in the scripture from that standpoint. That's why the founding fathers, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You have the right to pursue what makes you happy. And again, I'll just throw this in. There's a difference between liberty and freedom. So much today in our society, we talk about freedom. If you notice, the founders talked more about liberty than they did freedom. We have a right to liberty. You see, if you would, freedom, really basically, the basic concept of freedom is unrestrained. Liberty, if you would, is freedom within a framework. In other words, there are limitations to the freedom. See, just totally being unrestrained means if I'm going down the street and I see something in your yard and I like it, if I have total unrestrained freedom, well, I can just go in your yard and take it. And see, here's the sad thing. There are people that are starting to think that the federal government should have that right. That's a problem. Federal government doesn't own that. That's your stuff. God says it's your stuff and you have a right to it. Now, obviously, there's nothing wrong with paying taxes. There's a thing getting in. Don't get crazy with that. But the bottom line is, who's at the top of the chart? Is it the federal government or is it the individual? God says it's the individual. Now, we have a right to our stuff, the pursuit of happiness. Nobody else has that. It's our stuff. Even coveting, I'd like to get their stuff. Well, if you would, coveting, as Jesus put it, if you've committed in your heart, that's the same as committing it. Coveting is, I wish I could take their stuff. You've done it in your heart. You're wanting it. And so that still deals with that same dynamic, that same aspect. We have a right to the pursuit of happiness. We have that God-given right. God acknowledged it in his commandments, and he doesn't change. He didn't lie to us, and he's not going to change that premise. So therefore, these truths are unalienable. They're not given to us by the federal government. They're given to us by our Creator. Well, stay with us through this commercial break.
Augusta Seed, your local Augusta County seed corn distributor since 1977. Producing more bushels per acre for a greater harvest. A time to plant and a time to harvest. Ecclesiastes 3:2. From your friends at Augusta Seed. Buy local. Find them on the web at augustaseed.com.
You're listening to Ecclesia Principles with Ray Eppard, where we believe that all people are created equal and that liberty and justice is for all.
All right. Let's start talking about liberty. Among these, the unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberty. I really saved this between these three. I saved this for last on purpose because, again, when you look at it, the founders talked more about liberty than they did freedom. Freedom is unrestrained. They did not believe in an unrestrained public, but they did believe in a liberated public. They did believe in a government by the people, of the people, and for the people, that the people were at the top, the government was below that. That's the only way you have liberty. Anytime the government comes over top of the people, liberty is always lost, because at that point, the government feels they have the rights. It's not that they are ensuring the rights, they have all the rights. That concept is insidious. It just creeps into government when people begin to think that way. But let's look at why is liberty an unalienable right? What was it that caused our founding fathers to think that liberty and the right to that liberty and that it was unalienable was a self-evident truth? And I'll just rehearse this again. There was a point in time, and this is what began to cause me to study about some things, because when I read that, it was probably the 4th of July. I love going back over the Declaration of Independence and those things around the 4th of July. And when that phrase, we hold these truths to be self-evident, just jumped out to me. And I'm like, I don't think they're self-evident. And I really didn't know anybody else that thought they were self-evident. I mean, I didn't take a poll, but the empirical evidence would indicate, and especially in our society today, people don't realize that these rights are unalienable. It's not a self-evident truth. So obviously, they studied some things we haven't studied. And we'll get into that. We'll get into why that is. Because when you understand that dynamic and the history to it, you'll understand why the mindset has changed. It has been intentional, and it actually goes back to the latter 1800s. This agenda has been going on for a while. It's not a conspiracy because it's wide open out in the public. If you go read the documents, it's there. So it's not a conspiracy. You can see all the evidence, you can see the plan, you can see the agenda. But with this, why is liberty a self-evident, unalienable right? Well, again, let's go back to the beginning, Genesis 1:26. God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. See, that word there, likeness, in our likeness, that is so huge in its implication. Now, most of us think, supposedly we look kind of like God. We're in his image and likeness. And that's about the depth of it. Image really deals with what we look like. Likeness is addressing our place and function in the earth. That's what likeness is dealing with. And so if we're in the likeness of God, now I'm not saying we are God, but if we're like God, if we're like him, then what are some things about him that we could be like? And again, this is where it begins to be a self-evident truth, is one of the most understood traits of God, and when I say most understood, I should say most accepted traits, is that God is sovereign. He is above all. And if we're like God, then there is some level in there somewhere that we need to be like him in being sovereign. And basically what our founding fathers realized is that among men, the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. There's no God above God. Well, we as humanity, if we are like God, then there should be no other human over us. Now, that we're not talking about organizational structures, but that should not be the case. Each person should have liberty, freedom within a framework. That's why the founders always said, what we have, the type of government we have given is only good for a moral society, a religious society, because there has to be internal guards within the person to cause them to stay within that framework. But we have liberty because we're made in the likeness of God. That's an unalienable right, because if I am like God, then there is a place that I get to have the sovereign say. I get to have the final voice. God, in giving humanity a free will, gave people the right of choice. Now, he didn't remove the consequences of those choices, but he gave us a free will. He doesn't even override our free will. So there's an element there that we are like God in having a sovereign decision over our own lives. The founders saw this truth as being self-evident. I want to give you a quote. Thomas Jefferson made this statement. He actually, in writing a letter to Roger Wakeman, part of his comment there, he said, "The mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately." In other words, Thomas Jefferson is saying that there's not a group of people that are destined to be ridden, that they are subject to these other people. And these other people do not have a divine right from God to rule over others. That's just not the case. That if you would, the individual is sovereign in their own life. See, if you go back to the Bill of Rights, that's one reason that they said that you can't have unlawful search and seizure. You have to have a warrant. You have to have a cause to step into somebody's home, because your home, if you would, is your sovereign territory. Now, only if you're violating somebody else's rights do they have a God-given right to come in there. Now, we're dealing with basic concepts, and I'm not dealing with current law. What we have to do is go back to the basic concepts. Then we can straighten out some laws eventually. But we've got to understand the basic concepts. We have a right to liberty. It is an unalienable right. God gave us the right of liberty, and it was put in the founding documents of our country. Join you right after this break.
Want to make a difference in your community? Check out cityelders.com or search City Elders, Augusta County, Virginia. City Elders exist to influence government spiritually, politically, and economically so that life is protected, liberty is defended, Christ is exalted, and families can flourish. See about helping start a group in your area. You're listening to Ecclesia Principles with Ray Eppard, where we believe that all people are created equal and that liberty and justice is for all.
I want to repeat again Thomas Jefferson's statement. I'm just going to paraphrase it, that basically mankind is not born with saddles on their back and another group born with boots and spurs to ride them. That's not the setup. Again, this goes back to the concept that we have unalienable rights, and among them is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberty is an unalienable right. We're not born to be a servant. We're not born to be a slave. That's not how the Scripture set it up. And Paul, not Paul, but Thomas Jefferson was identifying this, that concept. They saw that as a self-evident truth. Now, in this, the thing you've got to understand is someone is always at the top. In America, it's to be the people. Again, the statement, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That basically the people are the sovereign ones. The people are the ones who make the decisions. Now, there has to be government, there has to be laws, there have to be regulations, so forth and so on. But this is to be derived from the people, and there's a governmental process to that. But in our society today, that is switching, where government feels more like they're entitled. I mean, I don't know if you knew this or not, but originally when things were set up, members of Congress and so forth could not exclude themselves from the laws that they passed. They had to be subject to the same laws they passed. That's not true anymore. That's why they've passed a number of things and they exclude themselves. Why? Because they see themselves as being at the top. So they have the right in their mind to decide everything, because they're not subject to, they're subject to an election, but they're not subject to the people in their mentality. They are not there to serve. And so you have people that, again, they exclude themselves. Let's just take one for an example. With Obamacare, they passed that so that everybody in America had to be subject to it. They excluded themselves from it. Why would they do that? Well, because they, quote, had the power to do that. But they're not supposed to. They had removed that. They are supposed to be subject to the same laws. That is right morally. That is right before God. That, again, with the people being at the top of the chain, again, they should, if anything, exclude the people and subject themselves to things if you understand the structure, the flow chart. But see, the flow chart's been lost through our education system. And I would just encourage you to look up Horace Mann and Alexander Dewey. They are basically the fathers of public education. You would be shocked what they wrote in the 1800s of what they wanted to do to public education. And when you read it, you will see that we're living their dream right now, and it's a problem. It is what is affecting so much of our society right now. And those two guys were extremely influential in what they set in motion as far back as the 1800s. They went contrary to the truths of Scripture. Let me pull out another statement. Again, because all this comes down to we have a right to liberty because we're in the likeness of God. Alexander Hamilton, in the Federalist Papers, he made a statement. He identified the monarchy, or those kings and queens and so forth, as perpetual magistrates who were only limited by the laws they chose to observe. Again, in a monarchy, they saw themselves at the top of the flow chart. In America, the people are to be at the top of the flow chart. And we have had, in recent years, in the last couple decades, it has been a strong increase of public officials, people in office. I mean, it's one thing to, well, I'm going to prioritize this enforcement. I understand you don't have time to do everything. But we have heard statements like, we're not going to enforce this law. We're not going. They're basically functioning like the monarchs were that Alexander Hamilton was identifying. When they say that, they see themselves at the top of the flow chart and not beneath the people. God has established it with the people at the top, and the founders built our government based on that same structure. It's not a matter, and again, when was the last time that you saw politicians end up in jail? It just doesn't hardly ever happen. You see, part of our problem today is there's different laws and there's different rules for people based on what people want to enact and what they want to observe. We've got to understand the people are at the top of the flow chart, and therefore things need to be applied justly and accurately. Anyway, we'll stop here at this point. We'll talk to you next week.
You've been listening to Ecclesia Principles with Ray Eppard. Follow us on podbean.com. Also available on Facebook at Liberty Justice HQ and online at libertyjusticehq.com.